Okay. Well, that's his wife.
Oh, wait.
So, hi, everybody. Hi, friends. I'd like to welcome you all here. We've got a spiritual journey meeting where we learn about how somebody got to where they are and what lessons we can all enjoy, and just kind of interesting stories. So my friend here, Lorne Garrettson, I've known a long time. For a short time in his life, maybe, but a long time in my life.
Not that old.
You're not So anyway, I've known Lorne Garrettson through Burial and Grounds and what he's done with keeping track of the gravestones. But Lorne has a few points that he wanted to bring up, and so I'd like to bring up those points to set the stage. Lorne grew up in California, and he moved to Maryland to go to medical school. He grew up going to a congregational church. Then, during residency, he met Beth and became a Quaker on marriage. He and Beth have been part of meetings in Buffalo, Richmond, Virginia, and Atlanta, Georgia. He's always been employed in a medical school, and they lived in Sandy Springs since the year 2000.
Wow.
So I give you Lorne Garrettson.
Good. Nice to be with you all, and nice to see you all. Particularly, I haven't seen Sam Stevens for a long time. I'm glad you're here, Sam. I should point out that the spiritual journey talks that we're doing, this morning's Washington Post had an article on a survey of Americans on how much and who believes in God and who believes in hell and that kind of thing. Fascinating that that was something I read very little of the paper, but that jumped out at me. So only, and 75% of Americans believe in God. So that's curious. Well, as you just heard, I grew up in California in a town east of Los Angeles City Hall, 12 miles, named Whittier. And for 25 years, I never told anyone where I was from because of the implications of the other person that everybody knows came from Whittier.
Who was a Quaker?
Well, it was another branch of Quakerism. But anyway, I did introduce him when I was a senior class president at my high school. I grew up in a congregational church, and while I was there, while I was a high school student, my mother started a youth church, and so to tell you that only tells you that we were in a family that was very embedded in the congregational church, and we went every Sunday, and I would made no questions about the fact that I was a member there and so on. But even with the youth church that my mother started and was the guiding light for, I don't remember ever really seriously engaging the topic of a spiritual topic while I was there. Everyone believed in God, yes, but that was about as far as it went. And an analysis of that belief just simply was not part of my rearing. I went to college, and there was a student church at college, led by one of the professors in a very lovely hall, where both my parents and my brother were married. And I attended there fairly regularly throughout college. But again, I don't remember any really in-depth assessment of the spiritual life, or you might call an analysis of the spiritual belief. I came east to medical school, and the only time I went to church in the 6 years that I lived in Baltimore was the time that the person who was going to give the sermon at a church downtown was the associate professor of the Department of Surgery at Johns Hopkins, and a bunch of us walked on over to listen to it. But other than that, I didn't go to church. Well, it was the 6 years I was in Baltimore. And then one of the strange things happened in my life. I got absolutely, totally, thoroughly irate at the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics when I was a second-year resident in pediatrics. I was not the only person in town that had differences with the man, but I got totally irate, which I don't remember ever doing else in my life. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I stalked out of his office. I went to talk about my future in pediatrics, and all he did was wanted to talk about his future in pediatrics. And that made me irate. I stalked home, I grabbed the phone, called Boston Children's Hospital, and asked if they had an opening for a third-year resident the next year. And what's remarkable was they did. Nobody has openings for third-year residents, for heaven's sakes. They did. So I applied for it and got it. Of course, the next day they called the guy I'd just gotten irate about, find out how I was. And I went to Boston, and I was a third-year resident on the ward. And sometime after the first of the year, I had a very, very sick 17-year-old boy. I still remember all these details. We had called in the best consultants we possibly could think of in Boston to make sure that we were doing everything we could for a boy who had gotten sick thanks to a medical mistake. And as I was listening to these consultants, I looked across the bed, and the image of the nurse that was standing there is still emblazoned on my brain. I can still see her right now, as well as I saw her then. About a year later, we were married. She had decided you have to go into nursing school in New York. She decided to try Boston, which was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. For marrying her was a remarkable turning point in my life in many, many different ways. But in one way, and the way we're talking about today, it's the way I became a Quaker. I married into, well, my wife was the great granddaughter of James and Deborah Brooke. They were the first people that came to settle this 1,000-acre plot of land here, which we now call Olney, Sandy Spring, Ashton, and Brookville. She was a 12th generation Maryland Quaker. Her grandfather, with many greats for it, was the man who organized all the meetings around the visit of George Fox. So she had a history of Quakerism and was deeply embedded in the Quaker religion. And so that's how I became a Quaker. While I had not had any serious thinking along the lines of the spiritual part of Christianity, that changed as I joined Quaker meetings, and I found myself sooner or later being caught up in the quotation that there is that of God in every man. And that seemed to be a pretty universal concept throughout Quakers. And as I say, we were active in the Quaker meeting in Buffalo, as he mentioned, Buffalo, Richmond, and 3 or 4 times in Atlanta, because we moved in and out of Atlanta for my service time at the CDC, and then for a postdoctoral training. And then at the end of my career, I spent 11 years on the faculty there. But that concept of that of God in every man was there, and I considered it often was the thing that you might dwell on while sitting in meeting. I never heard it discussed very much, but it was a concept that sort of was there in my life. And then I was very fortunate in my career to have been asked to take part in several medical efforts to help bring a member of the old Soviet Union up to speed on medicine. So I have visited Georgia 3 times, the Republic of Georgia. I was living in Georgia, but I was going to the Republic of Georgia. And I had the opportunity to practice medicine for a very short time early in my career in the country of Ghana, where Beth and I, Beth went along and didn't know what she was going to do, and she got there and found that they were holding the head of nursing together on tranquilizers. She was coming apart psychiatrically. And so Beth had to stand into that while I was standing into being the lead physician in a hospital of 60 beds, which was not all pediatrics, it was everybody. And so we had a very energetic 4 months, which we enjoyed thoroughly. But what I can tell you about that experience spiritually was we felt very much at home, engaged, delighted with all of the people that we were working with, taking care of, and meeting in the community. We met particularly the leaders of the community, the district commissioner and so forth, because I was the physician in charge of the hospital. So when he had things that needed my attention, that he would call me up and say, I'll be there to pick you up, take me in his Land Rover, and off we went to see this or that patient. But this was an experience where I can remember back that this was the thing where I began to see that concept of that God in every man vividly alive in the community that I lived in. I just don't remember anyone there that I didn't feel a kinship with. And of course, a great many of them didn't speak English, which is okay. You know, there was always, all the staff of the hospital all spoke English, as well as the native language there. But I felt a kinship with those people. That God in every man started becoming somewhat real to me then, but I didn't think that way at the time. But it's only as time went on, as I went through my career, that concept of God in every man. So that has That's a concept that is often spoken of in Quaker circles, but I have never heard it analyzed. When we lived in Atlanta, there were a few people who were, there were a couple of mystics in the meeting, and they were very analytical in my mind of spiritual being, and I often thought I would like to join them, but I never did. But that's the only time I've ever been around anybody who was critically analyzing their spiritual belief. I really never have, other than more and more experience as I've traveled, and particularly then when I went to Georgia. I can remember that so well. I've never been in a foreign country where I felt more at home than I did in the Republic of Georgia. Absolutely delightful people. Of course, I was working and had colleagues, and all of my colleagues spoke all three languages. They all had to speak Russian because they'd been part of the Soviet Union, so they spoke Georgian, Russian, and English. And I was so at home and comfortable, both with those with whom I was working and those who I was meeting as I was going around the country, having clinics and meeting people. So just supporting in my own mind that concept that there is that of God in every person, and I felt comfortable with all those people. What? Yeah. Excuse me, I made notes just to make sure I had it come stream to my thoughts. Well, I have never, in this meeting either, heard very many people try to analyze the spiritual content that I've just mentioned about it, that being that of God in every person. But I somehow still have, as I've given you the way through my life, I have experienced very broad communities and always felt that that was a reasonable way of seeing the people around me as people being a kinship, which I think Quakers talk about as being that of God in everybody, which makes us akin. But I've never really tried to figure out what I mean by that of God in every person, what the Spirit is, where it is. How does it live within us? It's in our minds. I have been a little bit shocked right recently by this concept. There is a branch of Christianity in the United States, a far-right religious branch, that states the concept that God enters the human being at conception. And this they use to support their concept that abortion should never be allowed. I must say that I don't have a good sense of where God resides in us. But the concept of God in a single cell organism is something I simply cannot abide. I think that's just doesn't make sense to my mind. the study that was reported, the survey that was reported in the morning paper today asks people, do they believe in God? 3/4 of Americans by this survey do. Then they also ask, would you believe in the devil? Far fewer do. And do you believe in the pearly gates in heaven and God in heaven and so forth? And that also has fairly few, much fewer believers than those who believe in God. And I fit in the majority of that survey in that I, as I've just said, that concept of that of God in everybody, even though I have no concept of how God is incorporated into our lives, more than in a little intellectual incorporation. But I don't buy into the concept of a heaven or a hell, or a big smiling person called God who lives in heaven. That does not fit with any of my spiritual beliefs. So that's it was just kind of curious this morning to see a survey being published in the paper that more or less summarized my spiritual beliefs. But of course, in the Washington Post, you're not going to get any analysis of what it means to have that of God in every person. And I don't know how to analyze that either. But I think I will continue to believe it because I've had the experiences I've just mentioned. And that's about as far as my analytical capabilities go for understanding my own spiritual journey. So that's all I have to say. Anna.
I've known you for a long time, Lorne, and
Right. Yeah, that's fine.
for me, I look at you and I see God. And you have been a big influence in my spiritual journey. I watch what you do and how you act. And I want to be like that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a great honor. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I would share something too, because I've been thinking about that phrase this week as well. Just being out in restaurants or stores or crowds, kind of looking around and thinking, well, in some traditions I'd say every person is the temple of God. Maybe I'd say every person is the spark of God or the light of God. But Quakers have this ingenious ability to state things in the sort of flattest way possible. So every person has that of God, whatever the heck that is. And then there was putting this idea in broader context, which I probably won't state correctly, but maybe somebody can correct me. Right here, about how I think the phrase comes from walk cheerfully over the earth and answer that of God in every person. So maybe it's hard. I don't know. Is there really a that of God that stands alone, or there's only a that of God if you're walking and trying to be cheerful at least every now and then? You're walking over this precious earth, and then you're answering. There's no that of God that just exists without the call and response of the answer. I don't know, this has just been running through my mind this week, so I'm fascinated that you brought it up today and appreciate your whole story very much.
Thank you. Laura,
It occurred to me that in your discovery that there's that God in every human, and it's something that you focused and refocused on as you became more of an adult, more of a Quaker, more of a something, that mattered. Well, what you didn't state outright was when you're answering that of God in someone else is when you're building what's in you. Just by answering what you see that of God in someone else is building your spirit,
that's an interesting concept.
but I'm positive of
Yes.
it.
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting comment. Yeah.
Lauren, I'm curious. The 17-year-old in Boston, did the child live?
Yes, thank goodness. Yeah, he was, oh gosh, I can tell you, I remember everything. It's funny. Of all the patients I've seen, you know, I can only pull out and discuss a bunch of a handful of them now, but this one, that was such a frightening thing. Somebody had treated his otitis media, routine kind of disease. 17-year-olds don't typically have it, but it's usually a younger disease. Had treated it with the wrong antibiotic, and we all knew that. And what had happened is it had gone into a mastoiditis and then crossed into his brain. And so he had an infection on the outside of his brain. And so we reared back and had him with the right antibiotics and massive as much as you could, you know. But we needed all the infectious disease talent of Boston to come and support us. Yes, he did well, and I'm sure he lived a normal life thereafter. But what a blessing! What a horror! And there was another girl that I don't remember nearly as well that I also was taking care of in the same sort of end of the ward. And when I went to see her, then that nurse on the other side of the room joined me. And before long, I decided that I should invite her to go paddle down the Concord River to the spot where the shot was heard round the world. And so I said, well, I'm getting off at 2:30. She said, I'm not getting off till 3. I said, I'll pick you up at 3. She lived 2 blocks away from the hospital. When I picked her up, she brought a basket with our dinner in it. That was the first date. Whoa. That's a part of your life that you remember with vivid detail.
Was the young girl that you were tending instrumental in this?
No, no, she was another complicated one, but I didn't. Yes.
Lauren, like Anna, I love you and Beth and your
Thank you.
family for many, many, many years. And you know, all of you touched our lives. Watching your kids and your grandkids is amazing. That of God, I believe it, I see it. You can look at somebody and you can just see it come alive. How do we explain the evil and when we don't see God? I've always thought of it as a loose connection, that we all have the opportunity to connect with that of God, but sometimes we don't do it. And it's just like a loose wire that makes all the difference. And so thank you for sharing your spirit with them.
I've often wondered about what you just questioned about. There are some people who seem to get so far away from an appreciation of the divine within other people, the enormous egotism. We have a good example right now, and this kind of thing. You wonder how it comes to pass, but I don't know. One of the things that I think is important to this is that that we do affect the people around us, particularly our children. And of course, I grew up in a loving family, in a loving congregation. There are the people who were trying to figure out how to do everything right for the people growing up. My parents did not baptize me when I was a baby because they wanted me to know why I was being baptized. So I got baptized when I was 7 or 8 or 9, I can't remember, by the minister of our church. I mean, that kind of concern about other people was obviously a part of my life. And I think that's something that helps to make that connection that lets you believe that there is a loving spirit that pervades all around you.
That goes to the front part of that George Botkin quote, which calls on us to be patterns and examples. It calls on us to do the work first on ourselves, so that when we go out, other people can see that and respond to us. So the quote actually calls us to do the work first, and then once we have done it, then we can go out and other people, we can make those connections.
I must say, I think it all starts when you're younger than being able to make those decisions. I think it has a lot to do with your growing up and living in a community which starts with your family. And so, but I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that I think that's an important part of it, and treating other people as if that you see their God. As you all know, for my career, I was a physician, and it's amazing being a physician, because when you approach an ill person, they're going to open up to you in a way that you don't open up to most of your friends, and you get to know them in ways that you don't normally know people. And it's very enriching. That interplay of people is very enriching, both to the patient, I believe, but also to the physician. I was a pediatrician, but later on, of course, during medical school and so forth, you're dealing with everybody, but through most of my career, it was mostly children. But I think that helps. That kind of interpersonal contact helps to build this belief, and that of God in everyone. So I don't have none of you are coming up with an analytical assessment of where this God is, but I never came up with that, but I still think it's true. Yeah.
Lord, I would too. Thank you for raising that issue that God and everyone. I think it's valuable just to keep that in our mind and wonder about it. It's so central. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a fundamental aspect that I understand of Quakerism. But even without definitive, concrete, analytical answers, we still try to act in such a way we have faith that whatever it is, it's something profound and good and wonderful. And that we act as though there is that of God in everyone, which engenders respect and caring and love. And so that is central to our belief, even though we can't nail it down. I think But I think it's so valuable to raise that issue. What does it actually mean? And the only thing that I can think of is that, where we act as though we are asked to act as though this profound, wonderful, amazing entity, or whatever it is. It isn't concrete like we can measure it or anything else. But I think that it's part of our faith, and we act according to that, so we treat people with love and kindness and caring. But I think it's wonderful to raise that issue. What is it? How does it fit in? And what role it plays in our faith? So I'm thankful for your mentioning that. Very important.
Well, thank you. For many things that people have said here, I'm feeling a kinship among us in this, the fact that we believe it, but no one else has got an analytical thing. One of the things that I wonder about, the belief in God is diminishing in our country, and the survey that was published this morning's paper was 75% of people do. And one of the things that has bothered me as I was thinking about this, never bothered me until somebody asked me to do this talk, but was that I've never tried to analyze what this meant in an almost physical kind of way, or operational kind of way. And I think that that's something that comes from the fact that we live in a scientifically rigorous time of life. There are many people in this room, and with myself, I thought of myself as a scientist throughout my career. I had a lab going most of the time, doing, medical research, and the concept of critical thinking that goes into that pervades more than half of our country. It's remarkable that scientific approach to things is so absent from the thinking of many Americans, but it's still a very common way of thinking. And yet when you come down to this, which we all, I think, are agreeing is an important aspect of our lives, we can't approach it from that scientific point of view. But we're also are not going to give it up for that reason.
So friends, we're at the end of our time, and I need to free up the Zoom link for meeting for worship.
I would say,
But
oh my God.
Lorne, thank you for
Didn't
sharing.
realize I'd talk this long.